Hello and welcome to the latest word on Black News with Brittany Jones. We're so excited to have you join us for our very first show. Now, this is a show where we'll provide you with an in-depth look inside Black issues and stories that aren't extensively covered by mainstream media. You'll hear from thought leaders who provide a unique perspective into the Black experience and find conversations that highlight Black excellence. On today's show, we begin with reparations for Black America.
This country has shaped and formed us, and we have given to it. And we have a right to be here. We have a right to have the benefits, and we have the rights of those to acknowledge the harm that's done and begin the process of change.
Right now, California is making the most headway when it comes to repaying Black folks for what was taken away during slavery. Recently, the state's Reparations Task Force voted in favor of compensation and an apology for generations of harm discriminatory policies against Black Californians. We spoke to Brown University's political science professor, Dr. Jonathan Collins, to get the latest word on the likelihood of this legislation actually passing. It has been done before on the federal level for Japanese Americans, so why not us? Let's dive into this issue. Joining me now is Dr. Jonathan Collins, political science professor from Brown University. Dr. Collins, it's so good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Brittany, thank you for having me.
So again, we're talking about reparations today. Obviously, some real traction happening in the state of California, being able to get reparations for Black Americans. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on where we are in the process and where do you see this going?
Well, we're in a very interesting place. California, the state of California has gained tremendous momentum. They've created this entire commission that's been studying reparations for well over a year now, and they put together what seemed like very practical, tangible proposals. And the ideas are being put in front of the governor of California, Governor Gavin Newsom. And there's a real expectation that this will turn into some deliverable action on Black reparations in California.
Talk a little bit about this bill, and do you see it actually being able to have the opportunity to pass?
Well, the California bill is particularly interesting because there does seem to be political momentum for it to turn into something. Now, what will that be ultimately becomes, I guess, the decision of Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and of course, the rest of the California state legislature. Now, Governor Newsom has given early signs that he is open to doing some kind of work or taking some kind of policy related action on reparations. Now you have the committee that's proposed, I think, an $800 billion allotment that would be allocated to, Black Californians. And, it's tough to see how that gets implemented, especially with fidelity. And we haven't gotten clear signs from Governor Newsom that $800 billion mark number is the number that the state of California will agree upon. And this idea of allocating, I think, over $1 million per person to Black Californians is going to be the pathway that they will go. But it does seem like whether it's a paved road or a dirt road, they're going to go somewhere on this.
Do you think other states will follow?
Well, I think there will be a lot of pressure created for strong Democratic Party states. And, the big question here is like, how much of this is the influence of Black voters in the state of California, and particularly within the California Democratic Party. Now, if you look at California, it's very interesting from a demographic standpoint. Black people are actually overrepresented, you could argue, in California. For instance, Black Americans make up about 8% of the population for Los Angeles, yet there are multiple members of the city council, multiple Black members of the city council. They've had one of the first Black mayors in modern history who served for multiple terms in Tom Bradley. There are state representatives representing the area that actually represent districts where the majority of the constituents are not Black. And so there's immense Black political power in California. The same thing is happening in the Bay Area as well, in the San Francisco area. There's tremendous Black political power that supersedes its population size. And that's creating additional momentum for a Black reparations plan in California, there's this political inertia there. Are there other states that mirror this? Are there other states where you can look and say, even regardless of population size, Black Americans have a particularly strong amount of political influence within the Democratic Party in that state? And I think that's going to be particularly hard to find. So I don't, California might not be something that we can replicate, but it definitely does create the opportunity for, if you were in Virginia, for instance, to put pressure on the Democratic Party there to say, hey, do you see what happened in California? We need that happening here. And, you could argue that that really is the major step one when it comes to Black reparations, is this public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and especially an acknowledgement of harm that has been enacted on Black Americans. Now, our current politics makes it difficult for that to happen, because the extent to which slavery caused harm to Black Americans continues to be refuted, particularly by a lot of racial conservatives. And so, to me, just the seemingly small step of acknowledging wrongdoing and admitting the harm is such a large step that separates this conversation from the Civil Liberties Act. And then from there, you have the creation of a federal bureaucratic office that is charged with essentially identifying and disseminating resources to specific populations directly impacted by that wrongdoing. And, it's just difficult to imagine there being a construction of a federal bureaucratic office specifically towards the allocation of resources to Black Americans. But that's essentially what it would take. And that was a longstanding promise that dates back to the Freedmen's Bureau that was dismantled shortly after the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. And so the idea of it has been in our lexicon for quite a while, but we haven't seen the execution as of yet. And so it makes it difficult to imagine, right? Can we see this really institutionalized, this public admitting of wrongdoing and harm, something that we didn't even see sanctioned by the federal government when there was a Black president sitting in the White House? Can we see that now? It seems hard to imagine. And then again, can we create a federal bureaucratic agency specifically for reallocating resources? And can that agency sustain over the course of partisan change? What happens the next time there's a Republican president in office? And could we see that bureaucratic office immediately being wiped away?
Yeah, no, that is very, very, very strong there. And I mean, even with that said, what do you think? Like, do you think it will, and I asked you this before, do you see it actually passing, or do you think that it'll keep getting movement and traction, but stalling at some point?
Well, even passing seems unlikely. So think about, at the federal level, something passing seems unlikely. John Conyers is known for his annual reparations bill that he offers to the House of Representatives, almost on schedule, on routine. I think Conyers proposed slavery reparations bill well over a dozen times, and the bill has never gotten out of committee. And it's almost become the rejection of the reparations bill has almost become a ritual within the House of Representatives. And so have things changed in this moment that create the kind of momentum for that to suddenly change? I think not. If there was going to be a moment when this would have happened, it would have likely have been in the immediate aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And, that's where we saw so much change around the conversation on race and Blackness and anti-Blackness. You think about corporations were starting to create all of these racial justice initiatives. We saw at least the George Floyd Policing Act become a part of the mainstream political discourse. And so it just felt like that was the moment for something to happen around reparations. Now now anytime you mention something politically around Black people or Blackness, it creates almost a political landmine. We're arguing over whether or not, Black history can be taught in schools. We're arguing over whether or not, Black people deserve basic opportunities and supports. So can we agree on the idea of a reparations bill? That just seems far-fetched.
Mhm. In this particular question, when this order, going back to for the one for Japanese Americans, when this order was signed by Reagan, that was 35 years ago. Black people were still feeling the impacts of enslavement prompted by discriminatory laws and legal decisions. So we talk about structural racism, racial wealth gap, policies and law enforcement policies and education. Why don't you think there was any movement then for justice on our behalf?
Well, the narrative on Black Americans was extremely negative at the time, and you can argue that it has been. But there was a leading conservative message that really painted Black Americans as lazy, as undeserving, as criminal, as dangerous. And when this is the totality of the narrative around a group of people, the idea of admitting that they were the victim of harm, that's an easy political sort of message to create, that these people don't deserve harm, that the conditions of Black Americans is the fault of Black Americans. And if anything, Black Americans are sort of taking up space and sort of not living up to the promise of the American dream. This was never a narrative that was placed upon the Japanese American community in the way that it has been for Black Americans for decades now. And so, I think step one, again, is in admitting harm and admitting wrongdoing, changing the narrative. And we've seen progress on the changing of the narrative by Black Americans, activists demanding that narrative change. But we need the federal government to be more upfront and forthcoming about the inaccuracy of and the danger of this misinformation around Black Americans, and how, when it comes to reparations, this is something that Black Americans are owed. This is not just something that they are being given despite.
And so many people, like, when I look across social media, and I've been obviously following this story just like you have, when I see their posts, they're saying that even here in California, that they just have some feeling that it's not going to happen, and that, Democrats are getting them hype about something, and it's just simply not going to happen. What do you say to that?
I think they're justifiable in thinking and having that response. I mean, the real question for reparations is, one, how do you actually implement this in a way that is consistent and fair? I mean, it raises more questions than it answers. And I'm not going to raise these questions to undermine it or to delegitimize it, but I raise the questions just to underscore the complexity of it. And so what do we do of people who are of multiracial backgrounds? What do we do with people who are Black migrants who are living in the U.S. but migrated from West African countries? What do we do with folks who are? What do we do with Black Americans who have overcome extraordinary odds to become wealthy? There are a number of different questions that emerge. And just like from a practical delivery standpoint, does everyone get a check? What happens when someone gets a check by error who is not Black? That is a real possibility, and something that could be a complete nightmare for the policymakers that approve it. Nothing would be worse than the headline that that third generation white person gets $1 million check for reparations. right? And so, how do you make sure that you do this right, that the resources get placed in the hands of the people that deserve it? And two, like, does it have to be monetary? Is it best operating as something monetary? Is that what restores harm when you think about its impact on wealth? Or is this done in a way that creates wealth, or is this done in a way that disseminates one-time resources? What happens after reparations are allocated? I mean, like, it raises a significant number of questions that I don't have the answers for, but I guess fortunately, I'm not a California policymaker.
Does the president have the ability to exercise some type of veto power or anything like that when it comes to reparations?
I mean, technically
Or
there
executive powers, rather.
technically there's the ability to employ the use of executive order. Executive order powers offer a wide range of actions that presidents can take. The 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 downside of the executive order is that it tends to be more of a temporary initiative. Now, maybe you could argue that that's the right way to go for a reparations program that doesn't need to be long term. But I think if you're comparing it to the Civil Liberties Act that was used to support Asian Americans, then that was designed as a both short term and long term investment initiative. And I think an equitable reparations program for Black people would, accomplish the same goal. So the limitation of executive order, or the extent to which it would be hard for executive order to travel across presidential administrations, makes it a bit suboptimal. But it is a viable way if Congress refuses to take action, but the president still feels compelled to take action regardless.
And my last question, because I think about like people like my mom who I speak to regularly, and then just kind of the average person that says, if we're able to send money to help Afghanistan, if we're able to send money to help people in Russia and all of these things, why isn't that money able to be paid out in reparations for Black Americans right here at home?
Well, it opens the door to an answer that I don't think we want to receive. And the answer, I think, is that the money that's being allocated for these people in other countries, it's not just to help their well-being. We're not giving money to countries because we just genuinely care about them and want to see them do well. We're giving money to people in countries because they're a part of a larger political agenda. These are about geopolitical relationships that the country has with other countries that we are either in conflict with or in conflict against. And so when money is being given to Ukraine, it's not just because we love the Ukrainians and feel so badly for them. It's because the people of Ukraine are in the midst of a geopolitical war situation that heavily impacts the US's ability to maintain a certain kind of world order and also be able to regulate the market around certain resources like oil and gasoline. And so, if money is being allocated to these other places, and it's not necessarily because of the most altruistic reasons, it's not because, again, that it's about the overall general welfare of these people, it's about a political agenda, then it almost kind of answers the question as to why we don't see reparations happening for Black Americans in the US. It's because there's actually been a political agenda, so it seems, to undermine the legitimacy of Black Americans as Americans. And investing billions of dollars into restoring harm that America has done to Black Americans doesn't send the signal that Black Americans are not a part of America. It suggests that the country is actually opening a really huge olive branch to make Black Americans be a part of its central fabric. And there just seem to be a lot of people who fundamentally believe that that should not happen.
That was political science professor Dr. Jonathan Collins from Brown University. Many thanks to him for joining us for our very first show. We'll definitely be following the latest on the looming reparations debate, so make sure to like and subscribe to this channel so that way you don't miss any of those stories. We'll see you next time on The Latest Word on Black News. I'm Brittany Jones. Take care.